How's it going, everyone? This is Ken and Brad from Pixelated Thoughts, and today we are going to talk about The Legend of Dragoon. This was a game that I was not a fan of at release, and even with the re-release on PlayStation Plus, I don't believe my stance on that title has softened, and while I believe there are other titles that are far more deserving of remake first, I will say that after speaking with Brad, this is a title that needs a remake to meet its potential. Usually when I make these videos, I ask if a game deserves a remake, and in the case of The Legend of Dragoon, let's talk about what a remake would look like. So Brad, where do you want to start?
I guess the biggest thing would be the story, honestly.
Really?
And my reasoning why is I believe it's a Japanese game that was just kind of thrown over to the English side. So just the dialogue in general, right? Really the translation, the not the non voice acting, the text dialogue. It just seemed super literal. It was just very dry. There was like no emotion or like context in a lot of the dialogue, and it just screwed up a lot of the game for me.
Really? I did find it funny because I don't, I was a teenager when I first played the game, and then I replayed it and went, this can't be the translation. This can't be real. Like some of it felt a little bit too tacked on. Like it was very tacky when you were like talking, and then obviously because it was a '90s game, there were some comments that were made by like Haschel and Dart, like the way they like viewed women for some reason in that world was like Shanna, she couldn't do anything because she's a girl, and then they were constantly trying to force the love between like Dart and Shanna, and it just didn't make sense. I do think looking at it now, I think that if you do a remake, you'd have to like completely redo the dialogue and the narrative. I think you'd also probably have to change maybe some of the location names. Like it did feel a bit too on the nose, right? Like especially with like certain characters saying things like the dragon, and I was like, okay, like we can be a little bit more creative about it. I asked you about that. I thought it was kind of strange that the translation was that off when it first released, and I thought that
Yeah,
some of it was a joke when I first read it. I was like, no, this can't be it.
right. So and after we decided to make this video, I did a little I did some digging into like the game, the development, and Japan Studio. It's pretty much a Sony company.
Mhm.
They had 3 years to make this. They had a budget of like $16 million, and
Really?
it was so late in the PlayStation One life cycle, right? So it it basically released like almost exactly a year before the PlayStation Two.
Right.
It came to North America like 6 months before the PlayStation Two. I really felt like they wasted a lot of potential from not making it for the PlayStation Two. For the for the 3 years, the like I think they had like 100 people working on this game. Like I really felt like what they were trying to do, like the scope of the world, and with all the obviously the dragons and the dragoon transformations. Like I really felt like they were being completely hindered by the limitations of the PlayStation 1, right? Like just going from one to the to the PlayStation 2, the disc itself is like 8 or 9 times
Larger, yeah.
yeah, so it's they were even potentially limited by the 4 discs that were as many discs as a single case could hold. So that's really all that they could have, put in the game. So it's like I just felt like it was just a weird, because it came out after Final Fantasy 8 and 9,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
believe. And like there's just such a drastic just polish that this game does not have. And it's crazy because a year and a half later they come out with Ape Escape, and I know it's a completely different ball game as far as like the games go, but like it was so clean looking.
Yeah, I think that that was one of the one things I had questions about because I was looking up old reviews of the game, and I think someone had mentioned that not if you don't try to compare it to other titles, which obviously it was going to be because Final Fantasy 8 and 9 just came out, and I think Chrono Cross came out shortly afterwards. The game looked rough, but like if that was a 3-year cycle, I mean they probably should have prepped it for PlayStation 2. I don't know why they wanted to rush it. But I know, like, for whatever reason, it really caught with a lot of players, and I really think that's primarily, because you have so many people who had bought the PlayStation, fell in love with a lot of JRPGs, saw Legend of Dragoon, and probably saw it as like this really ambitious title that I feel like it just kind of missed the mark in a number of areas. Like if we talked about combat, I love the addition system. I really think it is. And it kind of makes me view Legend of Dragoon as a hardcore RPG in a way. Because if you look at the way its systems work, like additions, certain additions, you literally get punished for missing an input. And it's like barely there. And I feel like for the PlayStation, because I feel like the timing was a bit off, you know, when you were tapping the button, that you could go in with Dart or Albert or whomever, and then you'd miss it, and then you just take massive damage from it. And then you also had like the fact that you only had what 32 items. So you only have 32 items, and then you know the Dragoon abilities at the time to me and still today really feel like kind of non-consequential, especially when you think of or inconsequential rather, when you think of something like when you have everyone with the Dragoon ability. But when you have everyone with the Dragoon ability and enter that little state, like only one person can like really get like the most out of their attacks. So I really feel like the game tried to kind of curtail itself differently as like this really hardcore RPG, which I didn't mind. You know, I thought that's fine. But it was kind of weird. Like their systems, like the addition system seems great on paper, but for the PlayStation at that time, I just feel like precision was difficult, you know, because timing just didn't work out. And then you look at like the Dragoon magic, like having, I mean, we just talked about this, you know, you talked about how the magic system was really items in the game, right? But you also had Dragoon magic, which was like a 1 or 2 shot use, but it really felt like the damage wasn't there sometimes, right? I think Rose with her Astral Drain is probably one of the most powerful abilities in the game, something you really like. And I really feel like the game doesn't really open up until you get to like Disc 3. I feel like Disc 1 and 2 are like just kind of prepping you, but that's like 15 to 20 hours of, you know, struggling in combat, especially when you fight what was her name? Lenus? Where she has like multiple like phases where she can go from like 1 attack to 6 attacks in a row, which if you're not prepped at that time would absolutely wipe your party every time. So what did you think about the combat? Like, what do you want to see changed, or do you want to see the addition system kept as is?
Well, I think it's a good starting off point for, you know, a modern take. So when you're saying, does it deserve a remake? And I think this game is a good model for a remake, right? Going back to like Chrono Trigger, it's like, do you really want to remake that? Like, can you make that game better?
That's
like,
a good point.
You know, should you even try to remake that? I think with Legend of Dragoon, there's so much that could be optimized or, you know, polished, cleaned. You know, I feel like it's a rough shell, and the combat is really the thing there, right? I understand that they're trying to make the combat more immersive or interactive, you know, with the addition system. However, after doing the same addition, I don't know, 87 times,
Volcano.
right? It's like all right, cool, yeah, I get it, I understand. Like you'd think after like 200 times you would unlock the ability just to like auto do it or something. I don't know. But you know, if you were to modernize it, and let's say it's not just a turn-based combat system, like it is more active, fluid, and you know, maybe there still is a timing aspect or a, you know, a button combo system in the combat.
Okay, yeah.
Instead of it just being turn-based and you pressing one button in a timing sequence, maybe it's a, you know, square X triangle or something.
Like a small QT section, like you're getting into your attack, you've built up like the addition, and then you can do like some type of small QT in between, like a slowdown. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that would be interesting. I thought there was a game that did that. I just really feel like the combat system, I understand why it was so different, like why people would love the game, because, you know, Final Fantasy 9, 8, I think with 8 you had like to time it right to get Squall's like Gunblade to like have that burst attack or whatever.
Yeah.
But like that was it. You know, you had some interactivity with the summons. I really feel like that was what they were trying to mold to really separate themselves, and like they focused a little bit too much on being hardcore, because if you compare this to other RPGs, like the game is rather difficult in comparison to its contemporaries. Like there's the only real edge you would have is probably with the items that you get, like unlocking like the frost, like using the frost spear early on just does way too much damage, like for a normal like just item. And it just didn't make any sense to me, because like it would say like small, add multi, and I'm like, I don't know what that means, and I'm like throwing, I'm like, holy crap, you can like maximize the damage of that ability.
And if you have a turbo controller, you absolutely break the game.
Oh, do you really?
Being able to add like 150% damage, or negate like 100, or negate like 50% damage, you just wipe people off the map, off the map with that.
What did you think of the Dragoon system in general?
It was flashy, right? I felt
Right.
like it was more of a, let's just make it look cool versus let's make it play cool, if that makes sense. Like let let's try to make this look as cool as possible versus how well can we implement it into the combat. Once again, there's still just it was just a matter of timing, right? Pressing the correct inputs at the right time to
Mhm.
maximize damage. And I felt like there was a lot of routes they could have went with the Dragoon system. A lot of other games have some type of system of like a trance, or some
Limit
type of
break.
power up.
Right.
Xenogear, you had the mechs,
Yeah.
and it's just like it just once again, when you compare it to the other games of that time, it's just every game just took it a step further, just made it a step cooler. It's really all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I've always like the first time you unlock it, because Rose has it and then Dart gets it. I was like, okay, this seems like I'm gonna get like a timer on it, and then it's like you get one physical attack, or you get to do magic. And I remember playing through a boss, and I was going ahead and just pushing through the physical attack, and I was like, oh, okay, so the damage is not great. That's kind of weird, like to have this limit break, and then with the exception of like Rose, because like she felt like the most kind of powerful character starting, right? And I was like watching her abilities, like, oh, so she attacks and heals. I'm like, that's a great addition to have, like when you're first starting out. But I felt like, being able to work your way up with the additions, and then eventually unlocking, different levels to the Dragoon, I was like, it didn't feel good at times when you're in combat and your timing. It felt like, you really had to, it felt like, normally when you play these games and you have like a limit break or something that's like this really expansive power up, like there's like real big damage. You're expecting massive numbers, and sometimes you get like, here's a couple hundred, or maybe like 80. I remember where I hit like the Dragoon attack with Dart, and I was like, that's it? I did it max, I got 80. And then there's Hassan, and he just does his like a 2-hit combo, and he gets like 150. I was like, what's going on? I was like, what happened here? I think there were some balancing issues. What did you think of the item system?
It was interesting because I felt like they tried to do something different, right? I really felt like Japan Studio was like, we need to try to do something, like almost everything was like, we can't really just copy other people, because there's the 90s were kind of the golden decade of RPGs. So I don't know, just it was just a weird, they put the limit on the items at
32, man.
32, and then you could use, a lot of them were offensive items, and you could basically cast magic through items, and it was just weird. It was just a strange,
Especially because I think if you think about it, like with items, it was actually easier to do damage, and it was less punishing than the addition system. You know what I
right.
mean? So like if you just kind of tap the button or use a turbo controller, right? You're doing like 100%, 200% worth of damage. And it's, instead of you doing the addition system, it may be running the risk of missing an input and then taking damage, which was like something that was so strange to me, because none of that gets explained, by the way, right? Like I don't really, it's just like tap the button. Here's the addition system. I think you have to wait till you actually get into combat, or down the line where you actually get like a small tutorial about what the addition system does. But I really feel like the combat itself was probably the one thing that really separated it. And I remember you brought a review up where the guy was like, precision combat makes it like, very different from other games. And I was like, I guess I think that's why you have so many people who love the Legend of Dragoon. I do think like in terms of like its simplicity, I think there's something, that a lot of people love about it. When getting back to the story a little bit, I don't know if like you can make that many changes, because I think a lot of people would be upset. But I do think you should remove a lot of the on the nose stuff. when Lavitz dies, like Albert just somehow just takes his place. I have the same
He's like,
abilities. He was my teacher. I'm like, wait, like,
he's like, oh, you have a spot available now? Cool.
yeah, essentially, that's what it is. The roster's up, baby. Let's go. I love that cutscene though, because I think like if you saw it in a remake, you could make that far more emotional. Because Lavitz is with your team for a little bit. I do appreciate the fact that Japan Studio did go out of their way in terms of trying to like absolutely kill characters, right? Even though like the translations I think were rough, like I really hate it when some of the villains were talking. They just sound so like cartoonish and stuff. They sound so cheesy, but like, you know, they were willing to kill characters off, but like it was hard to like care for certain characters that you just met and fought. You know, I think that was copied from some Final Fantasy games, like when you meet Halsin's you meet his protege, right? And pretty much he gets killed, and that's it. Or it's like, I have to bear him now. I'll see you, and then you go and look for your Dart has to look for his Dragoon Stone. I was like, okay, that's a thing. I think there's a lot of things that could be adjusted there. I just think that like the one thing I really hated, honestly, was like the way you traveled the world. Right, every game at that point, I want to say, got close to open world traversal, and this was really restricted to where you could go. I did not like that at all. I'm hoping they change that. You know, I really feel like probably some of the roughest things in this game is that, you know, grinding for experience was not fun. Right, it did take a long time, but I think that's obviously with modern releases, you know, shared experience has gotten better. Instead of just like taking 5,000 and splitting it 5 ways, everyone just gets 5,000 experience. You know, you can do something simple like that. Boss battles, what do you think? I think those are fine, right? I think those are pretty. I think those are the highlights for me. The boss fights in the game.
I think the caliber, the distinguishing factors from the boss fights from regular fights, you know, because I will admit some of the regular fights I struggled with sometimes, especially, you know, with the limited inventory sometimes. But
you got your ass beat, dude. Some of these enemies do not play.
You know, it's just like just a bad matchup or something. I don't know. Just some random encounters would just eat me alive. But then you come to a boss and then they would eat me alive. But it's like, okay, at least I understand that this ginormous knight with a giant, you know, axe or club or whatever, like, is probably going to one shot me. So, you know, I gotta plan this one out a little bit more. I did like the boss fights.
I thought they were so much fun.
Yeah, they had a bit more character to it than the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that you know, it was like I was laughing really hard when I was playing the game. It was when I was in the arena with Dart, and he's fighting like these random characters who are like stunned that they could, you know, beat him. And then you fight Lloyd, and it's like just randomly get beat up. I got beat up by a dude named Lloyd. Like, come on, man. That dude clearly is Sephiroth. Like, come on, like, what are we doing here? I think that with the Legend of Dragoon, I mean, here's the thing. It got re-released on PlayStation. I've seen like some of the reviews for it. You know, like people have are really excited, but I'm kind of shocked that PlayStation didn't, you know, kind of try to remaster anything about it, like try to update the translations. They just straight released the title, and I don't think it did the game any justice. I don't think the game is held up really well in comparison to like some of the Final Fantasy games. You know, that's like, I think my biggest probably beef with like what PlayStation did. They just kind of like said like, let's see what the interest is at. And so we had like a whole year. I don't think they've actually put out data to support like how this game was supported. And then now people are like, so what comes next? I think a remake would be possible, but I don't know where any of the original like staff is. And then for a remake, you would have to put in a lot of work with this game. There's a lot of changes.
Yeah, so you know, Japan Studio got dissolved.
Right.
They got pushed into other studios by Sony. Honestly, I think a remake's really the only way to do this, because if they just do a
remaster,
like a heavy, I'm gonna say a heavy remaster. I think like the remaster would have to have a lot of like quality of life improvement with a lot of aspects, and pretty much every 3D
model has to be redone. Yeah. I don't care what anyone says. I know that people talk about how the game like looks pretty good. Like, I think like the combat models look fine, but when I am in a town and I have to navigate the town, and it just looks muddy and nasty, and there's like these weird like ways to animate around. I'm like, we can make changes here. Like we could absolutely remake this and make it look a little better. Now we don't have to do Secret of Mana type remake or remaster
Right.
or whatever it was, but we can have at least do the game somewhat some type of justice. You know what I mean? Like we
Right.
can update translations. I don't think. Yeah, I know you can add voice acting, right? That's not consequential. I think that with the combat though, quality of life wise, I don't know if you want to increase like the item limit too much
Well,
because I think
I
that
mean,
takes away the challenge, right?
right. So, and once again, I think it comes down to like a options, right? Let's say they don't increase the item limit past 32,
Right.
but let's say maybe you equip an item that gives you a few more items, or you have a stash in the city that has unlimited items, right? And
Okay.
you can go back and like pick up stuff if you think your loadout needs to be a little different, right? There's I think there's quality of life things that they can add, and obviously if you want the like true experience, or or they can have like a like a OG difficulty experience, right? And it disables all the extra stuff, right? And
Yeah.
then you have the original experience, or you have the modern experience, or the I don't know,
Yeah, because
whatever.
I don't see the Legend of Dragoon as an accessible RPG. I really don't. I think if you can't get the timing down, you're probably going to be frustrated about it. I think that's like the one thing you really have to appreciate about the game is the addition system. Like it tried its hardest to be different in a time where like Square was clearly the leader in RPGs, but the problem was, you know, you have the Breath of Fires, like the games that came after or before, like you have so many titles that just like kind of, I've seen people talk about like the Legend of Dragoon. I'm like, oh, it's a landmark PlayStation title. I'm like, I don't even see that to be true in the slightest. Not
Right.
even from an RPG standpoint. You'd have to put all the Final Fantasy titles up there. You'd have to put like Suikoden. You'd have to put like,
What
all these other games that were well received, you know, and we're really doing, like Chrono Cross, in my opinion, should get a remake. Like I even because like with the the Radical Dreamers remaster was dog shit. Like I hated it. Like that was the most lazy thing I've ever seen. Like shout out to Square Enix for literally being like, yeah, we're just gonna put the game out again, put new backgrounds. But with like Legend of Dragoon, like you remake this title and you literally like we're talking visual overhaul, some characters. I like the designs look great in the 90s, but we're past that point, right? The addition system, I think you can keep it. You can probably implement it a different way. I think, we can also kind of like update Shauna as a character, or Shanna, however you pronounce it. I hate the way they treated her, man. Like they made her useless, like for so long, and I'm like, why? What was the point? I know she served a greater purpose. I remember being in the game and being like, okay, that makes sense. They did take some narrative risks that kind of paid off when it finally got to that point, but it took so long to get there. It's a 50-hour title that a lot of people probably struggled to get through because, like, old school RPGs meant you had to grind, but because of the item system, you could kind of cheese bosses, and you would probably do this risk reward thing where you would take away healing items for, you know, certain items that did max damage, that type of stuff. But with Shauna, it was like her inclusion in your party was essentially healing. But with Rose, you really didn't need to bring Shanna ever. And every guide I've ever seen on Legend of Dragoon pretty much was like Shanna stays in the corner. She never comes out. Everybody else, which is the weirdest thing to me. And then the other thing is, you know, you brought this up just before we went on. Dart. I felt like for whatever reason, as a main character, like his damage output was ridiculously low until you got Final Crush. And you said it was about his growth as a swordsman and stuff like that, even though he really felt like the most competent fighter sometimes when he talked about himself. But it was kind of weird to have Dart not be incredibly strong for a large majority of the game. I was like, I'm going to use Rose here because she does a lot of damage. I'm going to use Lavitz or Albert or Halston, somebody else. But you could never move Dart out of the way, which I thought was frustrating. But like I think like in the remake, let's make Dart like a more competent, more powerful hero.
Like they could definitely kind of lean into the fantasy aspect a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, even Dart as the main character, it's like his name's Dart. I don't know. Just not like it's not a cool name. Like I don't know.
I always thought that was funny. I was like, yeah, Lavitz, yeah. Like they tried really hard in other characters, right? Like Shanna, okay, Lavitz, Halson, like Rose. Rose is okay, but I was like Dart. I was like, oh, okay, come on. No one's looking at Dart and being like, you're the hero of the story.
I did like the color coding though. I thought that was pretty,
Yes.
like it was very obvious.
Yeah, very
Power
obvious,
Ranger style.
but it worked. Right, I think it worked out. I think that was completely fine with like the Dragoon system. I think once again, the thing with me is that the game would have been far more enjoyable if like when you're working through your additions, right? Because there's that risk reward with it, and you're determining how to use the items. And then we get to that Dragoon transformation. That damage output should be double on everything, because it's like a limit break, right? Or a trance system, and it wasn't, and that was like frustrating. I was like, come on. And then
when you make it a part of like the casual combat, it really reduces the impact that the Dragoon, put in air quotes, the Dragoon, in the world, I guess, in the immersive piece of it. It's like when you transform into a Dragoon and then just do the same damage of a normal person, it's just like, well, why even be a Dragoon at that point?
Exactly. And you have to wait till like everyone has like the similar level of Dragoon, and then you can do a ton more damage. I do agree. Like, I think you could make the game a bit more accessible. If you made it a remaster, I would say not being as harsh in terms of like the timing windows, because I really felt like that was like the best part of it was like getting the timing down of a certain attack. Like it's very fun, kind of like getting into that rhythm. So the problem was sometimes you're like, I'm hitting the button when I want it, when I want it to. Why am I being punished? That type of stuff happens a bit too often. But I really feel like looking at the Legend of Dragoon, I think you're right. It is a game that, like, amongst other titles in which we deem perfect, is a game that is perfect for a remake. It really has flaws that could be, I mean, because you could see it, right? You talked about the ambition is there. It's a super ambitious title. It's just like and its budget was pretty high. You said, right? You said 16 million, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
3 years, 16 million. I mean, I kind of wonder like if at any point they just felt rushed to kind of like put the game up, because there's certain like animations that just like look really funny, or some of the character models look really goofy, but when you're in combat, I'm like, you can tell like this game, like there's a gem there. It just takes a lot. Like this takes a in my opinion, a specific type of person to love it, and it has a cult following, to my surprise, and to listen to your surprise as well, because I'm on like social media and I see everyone talking about, oh, I want to remake for Legend of Dragoon. I'm like, really? People like that game.
So I think what happened is they built it for a Japanese audience, but then they were just like, we're missing out if we don't send it to North America. So then they made it like operational for the North American audience, and then for some reason it got even like bigger in North America than it did in Japan.
Yeah,
and so it's 100%. Just kind of in that weird limbo. I will say with the addition, the additions in the game, the one thing that really irked me was like when I would level up and then gain another addition. So you could only use one in combat. So you would equip the new one, and then you do way less damage than the one before because it's so much higher level. And
that was
what the crap?
that right there. And the last thing I'd like to see change is like let me buy weapons. It takes a long time before you can like find weapons worth buying. I think in 15 hours you might be able to buy like 3, which is weird, going through all the different towns and stuff like that. Like it was one of the weirdest things where you go to a town and it's like, all I have is a helmet and a boot and some boots, and I'm like, wait, you're a weapons store, that's what it says outside. Like, where are the weapons? Now we don't got that here, family.
I always like the physical upgrade of in RPGs. Like I like being able to see my party get stronger.
Yes, and that would be
weapons
cool.
Are a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would like to see like some different transformations with the armor. I really feel like when they start to get to like the flashy parts of the game, like the fact that you can literally go into the accessibility options and turn off the transformations, which are like the best part of the game when you're fighting. But the problem is, and you're right, when you're doing the Dragoon transformation in a casual encounter, it really kind of like removes how amazing that ability can be, because you're not one-shotting this enemy and they're still doing a ridiculous amount of damage. Sometimes I'm like, oh my god, what's going on? I think my favorite thing, and this is before we before we have our final thoughts on it. It's like when you're in a boss fight and let's say you die during your Dragoon transformation, that'll just stop and then transform back and then just fall on the ground. I think that's the best thing ever, dude. I'm just saying. So, you and I in agreement. Legend of Dragoon is a remake. We talked about what it would look like. I think that would be, honestly, pretty transformative. Honestly, like you'd have a lot to change, world wise, combat wise, character wise. There's a lot to do that they could modernize it. I think the game, in my opinion, would be far more interesting. And I wonder if Sony, as it's its own IP and it's like its own RPG, would ever take a risk on it, or would they just kind of dive in and say like, "Hey, we'll remaster it," or will they just assign it to like a third party to remaster? I think they could do that because that's what happened with Grandia 1 and 2. So I think that with that being said, you got anything else, Brad? Closing thoughts wise.
This is just wishful thinking. I think they just sell the IP to Square and then they make a cool.
That's
like,
I give you that.
Think.
Like I would be interested to see if like Square would purchase, because Square does. I mean, they've revived old IPs recently. They've just gotten hard in the paint with that.
I wouldn't. There's been a lot of speculation. I wouldn't be surprised if Square gets absorbed by Sony at some point.
Do you think they get acquired?
I don't know if it'll be Sony or not, but I think that would be kind of like a best case scenario. I really don't. I really hope Square gets to do its own thing for as long as it wants to. But if they get, like, let's just say they get absorbed by Sony, like Sony has a lot of IPs that they can work on, and Square usually hits that's their bread and butter is RPGs. So
they do nail it.
I feel like that would be pretty cool if they could get that modern take on it. But final thoughts. Once again, I think it's an okay game. I do feel like recently there's been a lot of nostalgia, reminiscing about the game since it's been re-released on the PS5. But I think it could be really great. I feel like it does have that.
It does have a lot of ambition, man. It does have a lot of ambition. It could absolutely.
It was just a weird.
Yeah.
It was just a weird timing for it. It came like if it would have came out 2 years early, like I would understand like the state it's in. But it was just the fact that it was released less than a year before the PlayStation 2, after so many good RPGs that look and play and just feel better. It's just strange.
Yeah, it got unfortunately sandwiched. It was like, hey, here's Final Fantasy 8 and 9, here's Chrono Cross, and here is Legend of Dragoon. And we're just like, why? Like, what happened? Where did we go wrong?
I was looking on Metacritic, and there's one review that I really like. It says, when it's all said and done, Legend of Dragoon is your typical one-night stand. It's okay for a quick fix, but nothing that will get you emotionally involved.
And that's how we're going to end it. So let us know your thoughts in the comment section about whether, like, what you'd like to see in a Legend of Dragoon remake, and whether or not you'd like to see either Sony take it or Square or a third party. I'm Ken. That's Brad from Pixelated Thoughts. We'll talk to you next time.